Gorge Route. Truly one of America's treasures. Howdy. The Royal Gorge Route operates today under the direction of the Cañon City and Royal Gorge Railroad. It was reopened in May of 1999. This historic line offers a majestic look at one of America's preeminent natural wonders, while transporting passengers back to the era of the golden age of railroads. The Royal Gorge Route is a breathtaking trip and the culmination of natural and historic forces that created this awe-inspiring spectacle. How did it all happen? Well, let's look back. I mean, way back. Over 100 million years ago, the Royal Gorge region was an ocean. Dinosaurs roamed here, and some of the richest sites for dinosaur fossil remains are found in the Royal Gorge area. Over the course of eons, the Rocky Mountains were formed, and the dawn of what is now known as the Arkansas River began. It took almost 3 million years for the Arkansas River to create the Royal Gorge. The banks of the Arkansas River today are home to some of the most amazing plants and wildlife. Colorado is known worldwide for the incredible variety of flora and fauna, and the Royal Gorge really lives up to that sterling reputation. Our trip begins at the depot. The historic Santa Fe Depot was built in 1914. It's a brick Mediterranean design in the classic Santa Fe style. The depot epitomizes the golden age of railroading. Tickets are purchased here and people get rested and refreshed, just like they did almost 100 years ago. The depot is packed with historic photos and antiques. Powering the train are 2 former Chicago and Northwestern F7A diesel electric locomotives.
Our engines are F7 locomotives, and they were manufactured in 1949. They have V16 engines in them, about 1,500 horsepower apiece, and the whole train is very smooth and very beautiful.
The train consists of former Canadian National Railways passenger cars.
The cars were manufactured in Canada back in around 1953, and they were used on a service up there, a commuter service, and they have a very comfortable ride.
The 23-mile round trip will take passengers through a 1,000-foot deep gorge, the most spectacular rail trip in North America. In its early days, the Royal Gorge was referred to as the Grand Canyon of the Arkansas. Boarding the train builds the anticipation of the passengers.
Appreciate that. Welcome to the Royal Gorge Route, folks. This is the Grand Canyon of the Arkansas, once known back in the late 1800s as the most spectacular, arresting scenic view in all American railroading. All aboard!
That's it. That's the word.
You can board from either door. They'll take your ticket at the door. Don't go too fast. Welcome. Thank you.
From the minute we leave the Santa Fe Depot, we're struck by the scenic surroundings. The distinct sense of Western history permeates the experience. Historic buildings depict the comfort of a leisure, elegant lifestyle found in Western America's frontier. The peaceful atmosphere belies the past of the Royal Gorge. It was just 100 years ago that this railroad line was embroiled in America's most famous railroad war. How'd it happen? Well, the lure of silver brought miners to the upper Arkansas Valley in the late 1870s. Men dreamed of the day when this narrow, picturesque canyon would be the railroad route to open up this rich western country. The Royal Gorge War began when silver was discovered in the upper waters of the Arkansas back in 1877. Rival railroads, the Denver and Rio Grande and the Santa Fe, sought to mine the riches of the West. Well, the Royal Gorge was too narrow for more than one track, so the competition for access through the Royal Gorge intensified. As the conflict heated up, shots were eventually fired between rivals and supporters of both sides. Soon there was a small army of men built in stone forts. Some of them are still here today. Rocks were rolled down on workers, and there was other acts of sabotage. Both sides hired armed guards for their crews. Legend has it that Bat Masterson led the Santa Fe forces. Fortunately, no one was ever killed during the war. After about 2 years, well, the Royal Gorge War ended when the Treaty of Boston was signed. On April 1st, 1880, the first Denver and Rio Grande train entered the Royal Gorge. As we enter the Royal Gorge, notice the gravity flow water pipe. That's a 7-mile-long pipeline built in 1908 to serve Cañon City's water needs. Next, the world-famous Hanging Bridge. Built in 1878 by the Santa Fe Railroad, the Hanging Bridge is a marvel of engineering, and it's known throughout the world. The canyon's only 30 feet wide here. The bridge and the train are suspended over the river. Inverted steel A-frame girders span the river, and they're anchored to sheer rock walls that plunge straight down and into the river. This unique structure has served on this main rail line for over 118 years.
The Royal Gorge was probably Colorado's most preeminent tourist attraction in the late 19th century and right after the turn of the century up into the World War I era. All the different railroads promoted their scenic locations, but the DNRG at the Royal Gorge probably had the most spectacular. They always stopped every train at the narrowest point of the canyon so that everybody could get out and look at the scenery and listen to the roar of the river, have their photograph taken. There have been many famous photographs taken of that canyon, starting with William Henry Jackson, on up Teddy Roosevelt, of course. He went everywhere in the West. He had his picture taken there. Even the Chicago White Sox in 1912, when they were on their way to their spring training camp, donned their uniforms and climbed on top of the locomotive and in the bottom of the gorge and recorded themselves for history down there. So this continued really as long as the trains went through there, up into the very last, even until 1967, when the last passenger train ran through there.
The world's steepest incline railway leads from the world's highest suspension bridge, 1,000 feet overhead, down into the depths of the Royal Gorge. The incline railway was one of the world's most difficult structures to build, and it remains an architectural marvel. Construction began on the Royal Gorge Bridge on June 5th of 1929. And after its completion, millions of travelers have witnessed the scenic beauty from high above the gorge. It's a spectacular sight. High atop the Royal Gorge Bridge, you can see one of Colorado's majestic mountainscapes, and of course, the Royal Gorge itself. Unlike Arizona's Grand Canyon, the Royal Gorge has been cut by the Arkansas River through solid granite. And there's the passenger tram, built in 1969. Through the years, visitors to the Royal Gorge Canyon included world-famous personalities. The Royal Gorge was a magnet to the movie companies, and Hollywood movies were filmed here around the turn of the century.
One of the first ones that comes to mind is a Tom Mix film that was done in the 1920s down in the Royal Gorge. He was riding his white horse up and down the side of the canyon walls, as you might suspect, and a train robbery was involved, you know, the standard movie plot, but they combined the cowboy movie and the railroad and the scenery all there in one spot.
Today, this stretch of the Arkansas River is one of the most desirable locations for whitewater rafting in the world. The Royal Gorge Route parallels the river, and passengers are treated to some of the world's greatest action and adventure sports. Just take a look. return trip is a welcome chance to view the Royal Gorge again. After all, one viewing is never enough. Travelers have repeatedly visited this historic railway since it was first designated a transcontinental rail link back in 1882. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad was then known as the scenic line of the world, and it still is.
We really had a ball. It's a good trip that I can recommend for anybody. We met a lot of really nice people, saw some wonderful scenery, rafters, the river, the mountains, the local animals and wildflowers, and it was just beautiful. I want to come back in the winter.
The thing I enjoyed the most was probably the expansion bridge. It was just awesome to look up at.
It's a great experience to ride in the engine anytime, but riding on this piece of railroad it's probably the best experience you'll ever have. It's a great program they have here. It's unusual for a railroad like this to allow people to pay for a seat in the cab. Every rail fan in the United States ought to be lined up to buy those two seats. I've seen the Royal Gorge from about every other angle, but going up through the gorge on the track is a great view. You get to watch the signals, get to see the track front running ahead of you. You get first-hand experience when he blows the horn.
I've been railroading right out of high school, about 30 years now. I operated the very locomotive we're sitting on here when I was on the Chicago Northwestern back in Chicago. So it's kind of a nostalgic trip for me too. The railroad going through here now is fantastic. Myself and a lot of other people are glad to see this section of track preserved.
I like the scenery and the rocks and the bridge, and I also like these flowers. They're really wildflowers. And I saw a deer and all the rafters and a horse with a lady.
As we pulled into Cañon City and approached the Santa Fe Depot, we're filled with a sense of geologic wonder and American Western history. Our thanks to the Cañon City and Royal Gorge Railroad for making this trip possible. We'd also like to thank the Colorado Railroad Museum for their help in the development of this program. And lastly, we thank you, the viewer, for sharing with us one of the world's most magnificent tours, the Royal Gorge Route.